All right, well, we are in a sermon series right now, the 7 life-changing questions that Jesus asked. And basically what we're doing is we're looking at these questions that when Jesus asked people about them, it had life-changing ramifications. And why we're looking at those is because those same questions today could actually be life-changing for you as well. And so we're going to be reading today about doubt. And so we're going to be looking at Matthew 14. If you have a Bible, you can turn to there now. If not, we're going to have it on the back of the screen. But while you guys are getting there, I just want to talk a little bit about what's kind of going on in this moment. So Jesus is kind of in the middle of his ministry, and he's traveling from town to town, and he's doing miracles and teaching, and big crowds are gathering. And so after one of these big crowds and teaching and miracles happen, he then takes the disciples and he puts them in a boat and he sends them across the Sea of Galilee. And then he goes and he dismisses the crowds of people. And after he's dismissed the crowds, he goes up to the mountaintop and he prays by himself. And now when he's done praying, it's nighttime. And he looks out and he sees that the boat's actually quite a far way out into the sea and it's being thrashed by waves and by the wind. And that's where we're going to pick it up from. Verse 25, Matthew 14. And in the 4th watch of the night, he came to them, Jesus came to them, walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It's a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." 28, and Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you out on the water." And he said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. And I'm going to stop there just for one moment because something significant just happened in that text that I want to unpack with you guys for just a second here. So what we need to remember when we read the scripture, when we read the Bible, is that we kind of have this 2,000 year later big picture view of what happened. And we understand for the most part who Jesus claimed to be. We understand what he was talking about. We understand that he said he was God. And for the most part, most of us in this room actually believe that. And so the fact that he came walking on water wasn't, although it's not ordinary, it's not like life-shattering. But what we need to remember is that in this moment, the disciples, they don't fully know who Jesus is. So they've given up everything and they've left all their stuff and they're following him. But there's some other verses, and so you can look at like Luke 9 and some other things that actually say that Jesus or God veiled their eyes from understanding and fully knowing what was to come until it had passed. And so these disciples are trying to figure out who Jesus is. Is he like a teacher? He's obviously got some kind, he does miracles and stuff, so he's a prophet. They think he's sent from God. Who is he? Is he Elijah? What's going on here? They don't fully understand who he thinks he is. And so what happens in this moment is that Peter has this kind of like an intellectual revelation where he realizes in this moment that Jesus is actually able to walk on water and it has some ability and some command and authority over the actual created world that we live in. And what's even more powerful is that Peter realizes maybe just for a moment, possibly, that if Jesus calls me out and in his power, I could also walk on water. Remember, Peter was a fisherman. He knew he can't walk on water. Dude's fallen in the water plenty of times. But he's having this moment of realization that maybe through Jesus, he could walk on water. And why you guys need to know that, why I'm stopping here just for a moment to talk about that, is because for some of you guys in this room, Jesus has been calling you out to something. And I'll get to there in just a minute. For some of you guys, he's been calling you out to something, to a change, to a time of transition in your life. And for some of you, he's actually been calling you away from something. He's been calling you away from some sin or something that you're doing in your life that's hurting you or that's wrong. And you feel discouraged and overwhelmed. And you feel like you're enslaved or you're in bondage to this thing and you doubt that you could actually change. And you think that you can't actually take that step. And why you need to know this is because when Jesus calls you out of the boat and into the water, and when Jesus calls you to something new or from something bad, that he doesn't call you to do it alone. That when he calls you to take that step of faith, he gives you the strength and the power to do that. And you need to know this because this is actually a huge part of what it means to be a Christian, what it looks like to follow Jesus, is that we're actually called to take steps of faith that are way beyond our control and our power. And we're out of our depth sometimes. And that's what it looks like to follow Jesus. He takes us into this place where we're not actually equipped to do it on our own. And we need him. And these steps of faith that we take, we need to rely and trust in Jesus. I'm going to keep going. Verse 30. So Peter has gotten out. He says, command me. Jesus says, come. So he gets out of the boat and he walks on water. He goes to Jesus in verse 30. But when he saw the wind, this is Peter. When Peter saw the wind, he was afraid. If you have a pen, underline afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? And when they got back in the boat, the wind ceased, and those that were in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. See, what's happening in this portion right here is that there's this picture of an internal struggle happening inside of Peter. There's this picture, not of an intellectual struggle necessarily, because he knew that Jesus can walk on water. I actually believe that if he calls me out, I can walk on water too. And then he does. He goes out and he walks on water and it works. So there's no intellectual struggle. The war is happening here in his heart. The war is happening in the emotional turmoil of being in the midst of a storm. So what we see is that this isn't a logical doubt that we're talking about. This isn't some carefully thought out argument against Jesus, against God, and the plausibility of all these things. This is a moment of fear overcoming faith. And so when Jesus asks this question, why did you doubt? What he is really asking is, why did you allow your fear to cause you to take your eyes off of me? Why did you allow what you felt to change what you did? About 3 days ago, I'd pretty much finished writing my message, and so I'm in my gym, and we have in my garage, we have some gym equipment in there, and so I'm on this rower, so I'm doing the rowing workout, and I'm listening to a podcast as I'm doing it, and as I'm doing this thing, it's this podcast talking about culture and church and all the things going on, and the mega church trends, and all the changes that are kind of coming up, and the fact that the youth of today are suffering from anxiety and depression in an unprecedented volume that we've never seen before, and the technological revolution that is causing all these things, and then the fact that even in Canada the church is barreling towards de-charitabilization, and all these things are falling apart. And I'm listening to this podcast as I'm rowing, and I just start to feel this overwhelming sense of just feeling completely overwhelmed. And I start to cry, which isn't good because when you're working out, you have to kind of breathe a lot. And so now I'm crying and I'm wheezing and I'm trying to get out of the rower and I'm falling on the ground and trying to find my sermon notes. Maybe I wrote something good in there. And I'm just freaking out and I'm having, I guess you could say, a quarter life crisis. Eight years ago, I had a full ride to SFU. And I remember walking up to my mom and my dad in the living room and saying, I think I'm going to go to this unaccredited Bible college. They were probably so mad at me. And so I went to this Bible college. I did 4 years there. And now I'm coming up on 8 years of school. I'm doing my master's. And neither of these degrees mean anything to the rest of the world. They have zero value out there. And now we're looking at this church and I'm listening to this podcast and everything's falling apart. And I'm going, oh man, how far out am I from my boat that I stepped out of? Maybe I can actually just get back in there. Maybe there's still a chance just to do something different here. And I'm ironically having this moment of doubt as I'm about to speak on doubt. See, what was going on with me was that I was having a war inside, and it wasn't happening up here. I knew all those things that I'd heard in that podcast before. I mean, I've been studying these things for years. I knew this was coming. The de-charitabilization, that's been in the talks for a long time. All of these things coming up, I knew about all of them. Nothing was news to me. What changed is that in that moment, in that little storm that I experienced, my focus, my mindset, what I was setting my eyes on, stopped being Jesus and the fact that there's a mission and a world that needs him and that he's in control of the church. It stopped being that and it started to be the wind and the waves around me and everything falling apart and anxiety and depression and blah, blah, blah. The same is true for Peter. So if you remember, Peter gets out of the boat There's still a storm happening. Peter walks to Jesus on the water. The storm is still happening. It doesn't go away. Peter makes it to Jesus. The storm is still happening. It hasn't gone away. And then he sinks. Not because the storm started, but because his focus changed from Jesus to the wind and the waves. In other words, Peter became afraid because he stopped focusing on Jesus, the thing that was filling him with faith. And he started focusing on the things that were filling him with doubt. And if we can begin to understand that, if we can begin to comprehend this, we will begin to understand that a mindset of faith defeats the moment of doubt. That a mind set and focused on Jesus, the source of faith, in those moments of that storm in your life, it will defeat that moment of doubt. And the storm might not go away, but a mindset of faith defeats the moment of doubt. Here's another way to think about it. If you were going to quit smoking, and so there's a lot of research around this and how to quit smoking. So there's two different ways that you can basically do this. You can look at a pack of cigarettes and you can go, I'm addicted to these, I have a nicotine addiction, I want to smoke, but these are bad for me, so I'm not going to do it anymore. And you go, these are bad, I'm not going to smoke, and then in those moments when you feel temptation, you go, no, smoking's bad, I'm not going to smoke, I'm not going to do these. Or you can try to find a way to replace that addiction. And so every time that you hit that moment of temptation, of craving, instead of going, no, this is bad, I'm going to try to remove it, you can try to replace it with something good. And so the people statistically who successfully quit smoking are the ones who every time they have that craving, every time they have that temptation to fall into it, what they do is they go for a run, or they chew gum, or they try to eat something greasy or whatever it is. They replace that thing with something better. Peter actually shows us greasy food. Peter actually shows us this happening, except in reverse order, right? Because he is filled with fear while he's on the boat in the storm. He sees Jesus. Instead of focusing in on the storm, which is filling him with fear, he focuses on Jesus, which replaces and pushes out that fear and fills him with faith. He gets out of the boat. He walks to Jesus. And only then, when he stops focusing on that thing that replaced the fear and instead focuses on the thing that caused the fear, that's when he falls. See, in your life, you are going to experience moments when you're in a storm. In your life, you're going to experience moments where there's a temptation for you to doubt, where there's a temptation to you to turn your eyes off of Jesus, to stop thinking about the mission, to lose focus. And what you need to know is that your mindset matters, and it powerfully influences you. The church has a tendency, I think, to focus too much on the things that are bad. And we tend to get known for what we're against, not what we're for. So we have all these rules, like don't say those words and don't watch those things and don't do those things and you stay faithful. And those are all really good things. Really good things to draw the line and say, this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad. Absolutely. But I think we spend way too much time focusing on all the things that we're not supposed to do instead of just focusing and spending more time, in my opinion, on the things that we are actually for. Because Jesus calls us to this full, powerful, amazing life. And if we spend more time focusing on that, I think we'd spend less time having to make rules about the things we're not supposed to do. I even find that this focus kind of comes out in the commentaries that I read. And so as I study and as I prepare a message, I read these commentaries, which are basically just really smart guys who write books on their opinions of Scripture and all that stuff. So as I'm reading through them, all of these different books they're going through and they're saying, you know what, this story of Peter, it's a failure and it's an example of what not to do. And we need to learn from Peter's failure. And I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, but this story didn't make it into the Bible because 11 disciples stayed on the boat. That story made it into the Bible because one got out. And I think we just have that focus. See, Peter when he was on that boat looking at Jesus, he saw a new life waiting for him outside of the boat. He saw what it looked like to have the fullness of following Jesus and experiencing the power of God. And Peter's gift to God was to step out of the boat and walk on water. And God's gift to Peter was to allow him to walk on water and experience the power of what that looked like. It was an amazing thing. He got to experience a far better life following Jesus than anything he could have ever come up with on his own. In that moment, Peter broke a pattern of doubt in his life. I have a friend who's a designer, like a programmer, and so he creates video games. And I don't understand any of it. So I was asking him one day about what does it mean to do all these things? And so he talks about computer code. So he says, well, when I create a video game, what I do is I create the world, and then I create all the things that you can do in it, and then I create the character and the quest, and I design him specifically to be for that specific purpose. And then that's the really fun part of my job. I was like, oh, so there's not a fun part of your job? So he says, yes. Part of my job that sucks is that for the next 5 months, I have to go through and think of every conceivable way that a player could abuse this character and could do something that he wasn't meant to do. And he says, man, it would just be so much easier if people understood that they were just supposed to use the character for the thing I designed him for. That's how I programmed this character to do that. I think the same is true for us, that there's a God out there who designed and programmed us. Not so that we can be robots who are withheld and constrained from experiencing a full life. We are actually meant to experience freedom and joy and all the good things that God does for us. And I think that if we can wrap our minds around the fact that there's a good God out there who actually wants you to experience a full life, then this Bible stops becoming a rule book and it starts becoming a guidebook. Starts becoming a guidebook to what it looks like to actually have freedom from the things that hold you down and chain you and enslave you and keep you in bondage. It starts to show you what it's like to have freedom in your marriage, in your relationships, in the way you treat other people and experiencing love. This is a guidebook. If you're not a Christian here today, if you're exploring or you have no idea even how you got here or why you're listening to me, I want you to know something. There is a God, a good God who created the world and who created you, but more than that, he knows you. He knows who you are because he created and he designed you. He knows what you are made for and what you aren't made for. And he wants you to live in that fullness. Don't hear me wrong. It doesn't mean there aren't going to be storms. It doesn't mean that just becoming a Christian makes your life easy. But there's a better way to live, and it's found in Jesus. Brent preached last week on how Jesus is not only the resurrection, that he's like a ticket into heaven, so to speak, but he's also life. That following him is actually just so much better than everything else. One of my favorite things to see in movies is when they go do time travel. And so I love it because you get the guide, right? The character, the wizard, whatever he is. And so he comes up to the person who's going to go time traveling and he gives them the thing and he says, now listen very closely. He says, you need to be incredibly careful when you go back in time because any little decision that you make could radically alter the path of the future and could change everything. When you come back, you wouldn't even recognize the world. So you need to be incredibly careful about every little decision that you make. And then they go back in time and they do the thing and they save the world or whatever happens. And they come back and they're like, woo, good stuff. And then the guy's like, okay, awesome. All right, go ahead. See you later. And it's like, yeah, but haven't they ever thought that maybe there's somebody ahead of them who's coming back in time to their time and they're saying the exact same thing about them in that moment? Because the reality is, if it's true that what you do in the past, even the smallest little thing could alter your future, then that's true for you right now, that what you do right now could actually change who you're going to become or what's going to happen in your future. Your decisions matter. How you live your life today will change who you are tomorrow. See, after Peter got out of the boat, one of the commentators that I was reading about, he said something interesting. He said, after this moment in Scripture, after like the whole narrative of Jesus from start to finish, this point right here was actually an incredibly decisive moment, because from this point onwards, Peter is almost always the one who responds to Jesus from now on. Peter is almost always the one who answers Jesus' calls, who does something bold and who steps out and does something from this point onwards. And that's why there's a prophecy around Peter that he's the rock that Jesus will build the church on. And God uses Peter powerfully to build the church. He's one of the most significant leaders and figureheads in the church. Why? Because in that moment, Peter broke a pattern of doubt in his life. In that moment, Peter identified that he wanted to live for something more, and he wanted to do more, and he wanted to experience the power of God in his life moving forward from that point onwards. And so he stepped out into God's exciting future for him. Because a practice of doing, a practice of stepping out into what God has for you defeats the pattern of doubt. A practice of doing defeats the pattern of doubt. See, if you go read 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Peter, which are books that he wrote later in his life, he's a drastically different person. You wouldn't even recognize the Peter that fell into the water and had no, and Lord save me. And then you read 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Peter, and he's like this bedrock of faithfulness. When I bought my first home, well, my only home, we just bought it a couple months ago, and it was super exciting. And so my mom was helping us out through the whole process. So Carrie, me, and my wife, we bought this house, and we were so pumped. And then all of a sudden, the government starts talking about how they're like going to do all these things, and they're going to institute all these new legislations to bring down house prices, which I was totally for until I bought a home. Then I was like, oh, wait a minute. And I remember the first time an article came up and I read it on my phone, and it's like, house sales are down like 20% year over year. And it's like, we're seeing like the biggest drop in 10 years in house sales. And I was like freaking out. Have a aneurysm. And I'm texting my mom and I'm like, Mom, do you see the news? Like, do you see what happened? And she's just like, relax. Be calm. She's like, it's okay. It's going to be okay. And every single wave that came, I was like flipped from side to side. And then it was like, oh, and the house prices are up. And I see like, oh, great. And then it's like down. And I'm just, oh my gosh. And I was just like this giant mess roller coaster ride. And my mom was just constant and steady the whole time. And I was like, why? How could she be so calm? Well, because she got in the housing market 35 years ago. She's been stepping out of that boat for years and years and years. It's just been a couple months for me. This is all new. But what she did 35 years ago has changed who she is now. And she is now a steadfast, faithful homeowner. John Ortberg has a quote. He says this, only Peter knew that when he sank, Jesus would be there and was wholly adequate to save. Only Peter knew that. The other disciples could not know because they never got out of the boat. This is the fundamental truth. If you want to walk on water, you've got to get out of the boat. If you want to experience the power of God in your life, you've got to take a step of faith. It involves risky obedience. See, here's the thing that I think we struggle with is that it's not about believing harder. You're not some like Marvel action hero character that just has like this breakthrough where you just will yourself to believe and all of a sudden it's like, oh, look, and it's strong and everything. It's not about that. The challenge here is it's about knowing who you believe in better. My mom wasn't fazed by the housing market because she's been in it for a long time and she knows it well. Not because she like chose not to be scared and not to be afraid. I want to take you guys back to something a little bit earlier on here in Scripture that I talked about, but we didn't read through. After Jesus dismisses the disciples, puts them on the boat and sends them out, and then dismisses all the crowds, he goes up to the mountain by himself to pray. And he stays there until it's late in the night. See, when Jesus came to them walking on the water, there was no room for fear in his heart. Not because he chose to believe really hard and he had so much willpower, but because he knew who was in control of the wind and the waves and he knew who sent him so well that there was no room for fear. So I'm not going to lie to you guys, I have really struggled with devos. Like all my life growing up, it's you should do devos and you should have your God time every morning and pray and all that stuff. And quite honestly, I just never did it. And I probably shouldn't say that from the front, but it's just true. I never liked doing devos. I never understood why I needed to do them. I never really actually spent a lot of time doing them at all. I just was like, I don't know, I'll just watch the movie when it comes out or something. And I just wasn't interested. And I didn't really understand, why should I do this? And I'm beginning to understand that the time that we spend in Scripture learning who God is, the time that we spend in prayer learning that God is, we don't do it because we're supposed to. We don't do it because it's the right thing to, or because it's wrong not to. We do it because part of our life as being Christians, as following Jesus, requires us to follow him. And that's hard. That's a challenging thing because he calls you away from things that are kind of tempting and that seem really fun in the moment, but ultimately hurt you. And so when you are called to follow him, if you don't know him well, it's going to be a really difficult decision. And so the value in spending your time in the Word is because you grow to know him more. And so when you walk with him in every step of your life and he leads you, that you follow him and there's no room for fear. And yeah, the storm rages. And yeah, being a Christian isn't a pill that you take to make it easier. But it's a life you take on that makes it worth it, that gives you purpose, it gives you meaning. Greg Lavoie, he has this poem. He calls it's on the common cold of the soul, is what he calls it. He says, to sinful patterns of behavior that never get confronted and changed, abilities and gifts that never get cultivated and deployed, until weeks become months and months turn into years. And one day you're looking back on a life of deep, intimate, gut-wrenching, honest conversations you never had. Great, bold prayers you never prayed. Exhilarating risks you never took. Sacrificial gifts you never offered. And lives you never touched. And you're sitting in a recliner with a shriveled soul and forgotten dreams, and you realize that there is a world of desperate need and a great God calling you to be a part of something bigger than yourself, and you see the person you could have become but did not. You never followed your calling. You never got out of the boat. One of the things we do here at SouthRidge is we host a soccer camp every summer. And it's an amazing, hundreds of kids come. Some of them are hearing about Jesus for the first time in their life. We've been doing it for over 20 years. And we just do it right here in our backyard in the Langley Christian School's field. And it's just such a missional, amazing piece of us getting out of the boat and reaching into our community. But this year we have a closed door in front of us. Because this year Langley Christian School is expanding, and so they voted to start construction of some portables on that field, and we can no longer hold soccer camp here. And for the last little while, the staff team has been praying, John has been sweating, and we have been trying to find a new place where we can host soccer camp. We've been trying to find a new place where God is calling us to go, to step out of the boat and do something new and break 20 years of tradition, which is frankly a little scary. And so this year we are deciding to do it at James Hill Park. And when we went there and when we saw this area, we just saw rows and rows of homes that were all looking straight out into the field where we were going to be holding soccer camp. And we looked at this and we went, wow, we're going to be on display for the community. This is part of our mission and vision, that we will turn outward and the community will experience God through us. And it's frankly a little nerve-wracking and a little scary because it's a new place. It's going to involve all of us. It's going to involve everybody helping. But we're also incredibly excited because this is the next thing that we're going to step out to as a church. This is the next thing that God is calling us to. But I want to zero in on you for a second. If you feel as though you are in a pattern of doubt, if you feel as though you are not experiencing God in the fullness of what he brings, I want to challenge you to cry out just like Peter did. I want to challenge you to say, Lord, call me out on the waters. Call me out to something bigger than myself. Call me out to something that I don't have enough strength on my own to do. And in a moment, we're going to have a prayer time. There's going to be people in the back, and I want to challenge you to go and pray with somebody and ask them to help you pray and call out to God. And if you are in the midst of a storm in this moment, if you have wind and waves and they're crashing down all around you, I want to encourage you to set your mind on Jesus who fills you with faith. And I want to encourage you to go to the back as well and pray, but instead I want you to pray with somebody that your mind would be set back on Jesus and the storm might not pass. But I want to remind you that he calls you out in his power, not just yours. Let me pray for you. Jesus, I just come to you in this moment now, and I don't really actually have a lot to say because it's not me. I mean, like I didn't even listen to my own message on 2 nights before I wrote it, and I'm sitting here having this massive moment of doubt, and the reality is, Jesus, that can happen to all of us. We're not immune to this. And Lord, I just ask that you would inspire and evoke something inside of our hearts, that your Spirit would move inside of us, and that you be speaking to us right here, right now, that you are not immune to this. You are human as well. That we all need you, Jesus. I pray that you give us the courage to step out on the waters, whether it looks like praying with someone beside us or going to the back and praying. But I pray, Lord, I pray that we would do something today, that how we live today will change who we are tomorrow. I pray this in your name, Jesus. Amen.